The broken transmission. The crystalline spires of the galactic communication hub hummed with energy as thousands of messages flowed between star systems. Lyra Vex pressed her translucent hand against the control panel, her body flickering with the soft blue light that indicated deep concentration. As one of the few Ethereans working in the hub, she took pride in her ability to process multiple transmissions simultaneously through her species' natural telepathic abilities. The emergency alert shattered her peaceful state like glass hitting stone. Her crystalline form pulsed bright red as the desperate transmission broke through the standard communication channels. The voice was weak, distorted by distance and interference, but the terror in it was unmistakable. This is Colony 7 on Proxima Centauri B. We are under attack by the Void Syndicate. They came without warning 3 days ago. Our defense grid is failing. We have civilians trapped in the underground shelters, including younglings who cannot survive much longer without proper life support. Please, anyone who receives this message, we need immediate assistance. The Syndicate ships are too many. We estimate 48 hours before our last shields collapse. The transmission cut to static. Lyra's form flickered between blue and red as she processed what she had heard. The Void Syndicate was legendary throughout the galaxy, not for their honor, but for their cruelty. They were pirates, raiders, and slavers who had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades. No military force had ever successfully challenged them. She immediately forwarded the distress call to the Galactic Council's Emergency Response Division. Within minutes, representatives from dozens of worlds appeared on the holographic display surrounding the Great Chamber of the Council Station. The sight would have been magnificent under different circumstances: beings of pure energy floating alongside insectoid hive minds, aquatic creatures in pressure suits standing next to towering plant-based life forms. Council Speaker Theron, a being of living gas contained within a shimmering force field, called the emergency session to order. Fellow beings, we have received a distress call from the Etherian colony on Proxima Centauri B. They report an attack by the Void Syndicate and request immediate military assistance. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Commander Zephyr of the Avian Confederation ruffled his golden feathers nervously. The Void Syndicate has never been defeated in open combat. Their fleet numbers in the hundreds. Even our combined forces would struggle against them. The Aquatic Federation cannot deploy to a primarily land-based world, gurgled Admiral Nerian through his translation device. Our forces require constant hydration and would be at a severe disadvantage. The Silicon Collective's representative, a geometric crystal formation called Unit Prime, spoke in mathematical terms. Analysis indicates a 97.3% probability of mission failure if we engage the Void Syndicate directly. The resources required would exceed the value of the colony by a factor of 12. One by one, each major species found reasons to avoid the mission. The hive mind claimed their warriors were needed to defend their own territories. The energy beings said they were in the middle of a crucial scientific experiment. The Plant Confederation stated that their soldiers moved too slowly for rapid deployment. As the refusals mounted, Lyra felt her crystalline form dim with despair. Her people, the Etherians, were one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They had never developed weapons of war, choosing instead to focus on art, philosophy, and communication. They depended on the galactic community for protection, but now that community was abandoning them. It was then that a new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. What about Earth? The suggestion came from Advisor Kren, a minor diplomat from the Outer Rim territories. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Several representatives made sounds of disgust or alarm. Others simply stared in shock. The humans. Commander Zephyr's voice rose an octave. You want to contact the Deathworlders? The term sent a chill through the chamber. Earth was classified as a Class 15 death world, a planet so hostile that most galactic life forms would die within hours of exposure to its environment. The humans who had evolved there were considered dangerous by most civilized species. They are violent primitives, declared Unit Prime. Their planet has weather systems that can destroy entire cities, predators that hunt in packs, and toxic atmospheric conditions during certain seasons. The humans themselves solve most problems through physical violence. That may be exactly what we need, Speaker Theron said quietly. The humans joined our council only 2 years ago, but they have already proven their military capabilities. They defeated the Raider clans when they attacked the trade routes near the Vega system. Those were just pirates, protested Admiral Nerian. The Void Syndicate is a true military force with advanced weaponry and tactics. And yet, Theron replied, the humans survived on a world that tried to kill them every day for millions of years. Perhaps that experience has value. The debate continued for hours, but in the end, desperation won. The message was sent to Earth through the fastest communication channels available. On Lunar Base, orbiting Earth's moon, Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing fleet readiness reports when the priority transmission arrived. She was a compact woman with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. At 52, she had fought in the colonial wars, the asteroid mining conflicts, and the defense of the outer colonies. She read the message twice, then called for her senior staff. Within an hour, the conference room was filled with Earth's top military leaders. Captain Marcus Stone, commander of the 1st Expeditionary Marine Force, sat across from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the military's chief xenobiologist. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, head of the Starfighter Corps, reviewed tactical data on her tablet, while General William Torres, the Army's strategic planning chief, studied star charts. The situation is straightforward, Admiral Chen began. An alien colony is under attack by a superior force. They've asked for help. Everyone else has refused. What are we looking at in terms of enemy strength? Asked Captain Stone. He was a large man with scarred hands and a reputation for never leaving a soldier behind. The Void Syndicate operates approximately 200 combat vessels, ranging from fighters to heavy cruisers. They are led by a warlord, Cold Crix, who's been raiding the outer systems for 30 years. Intelligence suggests they have around 50,000 troops. Colonel Hayes whistled softly. We can field maybe 40 ships and 10,000 Marines. The odds aren't good. The odds are never good, replied Admiral Chen. But since when do we base our decisions on odds? Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Admiral, I've been studying the syndicates tactics. They rely on overwhelming force and fear. They've never faced an enemy that fights back with the kind of intensity that humans bring to combat. What do you mean? Asked General Torres. Most galactic species fight to achieve specific objectives, territory, resources, strategic advantage. They calculate acceptable losses and retreat when those limits are exceeded. Humans fight for different reasons. We fight to protect people. We've never met simply because it's the right thing to do. That makes us unpredictable. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. How quickly can we mobilize a fleet? Give me 12 hours, said Captain Stone. I'll have the first Marines ready for deployment. The Starfighter Corps can be ready in 8 hours, added Colonel Hayes. The fleet will need more time, said General Torres. Our ships are scattered across 3 systems. But I can have our fastest vessels ready within 18 hours. Admiral Chen stood. Do it. And send a message to the colony. Tell them help is coming. The message reached Proxima Centauri B just as the Void Syndicate began their final assault on the colony's outer defenses. In the underground shelters, Etherian families huddled together as explosions shook the ground above them. When the human message played over their emergency communication system, many of them began to glow with hope for the first time in days. The message was simple: this is the Earth Defense Force. We have received your distress call. Help is coming. Hold on. Across the galaxy, other species monitored the communications. Most thought the humans were committing suicide. The Void Syndicate had never been defeated. Some wondered if the Deathworlders had finally found a fight they couldn't win, but on Earth, men and women were already boarding ships and checking their weapons. They didn't care about the odds. They didn't care that they were outnumbered 5-1. Someone had asked for help, and humans had never learned how to say no to that request. The Earth Defense Force moved with a speed that surprised even their critics. Within 24 hours, Admiral Chen had assembled a fleet of 42 combat vessels and support ships. The flagship was the EDF Defiance, a heavy cruiser designed for extended combat operations. Captain Stone's Marines were loaded into assault transports, while Colonel Hayes's fighters were distributed among the carrier ships. As the human fleet prepared to depart Earth's solar system, they knew they were heading into an impossible battle. The Void Syndicate had superior numbers, better weapons, and decades of combat experience. But the humans had something else, a determination to protect innocent lives regardless of the cost. The journey to Proxima Centauri would take 5 days. At maximum speed. During that time, the human fleet encountered something that changed everything. They found refugee ships fleeing the battle zone, packed with alien families who had escaped before the main attack. The refugee vessels were in terrible condition. Their life support systems were failing, their hulls were cracked from hasty departures, and many carried injured passengers. Without hesitation, Admiral Chen ordered the fleet to stop and render assistance. For 18 hours, human crew members worked around the clock to repair the alien ships, transfer supplies, and provide medical care. The refugees were amazed by the speed and efficiency of the human response. They had never seen any species work with such focused determination. Lieutenant Commander David Park, the Defiance's chief engineer, led the repair efforts. He used materials and techniques that were considered incredibly advanced by galactic standards. What the aliens saw as miraculous repairs, Park saw as basic maintenance. The hull plating humans used on their ships could withstand conditions that would destroy most alien technology. The rescued aliens told horrific stories about the Syndicate's attack. They described weapons that could melt through meter-thick armor, soldiers who showed no mercy even to children, and a systematic campaign of terror designed to break the will of the defenders. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, one of Captain Stone's squad leaders, listened to these accounts with growing anger. She was a veteran of the colonial wars who had joined the military to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. As she cleaned her rifle and checked her ammunition, she made a quiet promise to herself and to the refugees who had suffered so much. The stories also provided valuable intelligence. Dr. Vasquez learned that the Void Syndicate forces were primarily reptilian beings from a high-gravity world. They were strong and resilient, but they had one critical weakness: they were cold-blooded and required environmental suits to function in most planetary conditions. If we can disrupt their thermal regulation systems, she explained to Admiral Chen, we can severely impact their combat effectiveness. Earth's Marines are trained to fight in extreme temperatures. We can use that advantage. As the human fleet neared the Proxima Centauri system, long-range sensors began detecting the enemy. The Void Syndicate armada was even larger than intelligence had suggested. Over 300 ships hung in space around the besieged planet. Their hulls scarred from decades of combat. On the planet's surface, the situation was desperate. The Etherean defenders had been pushed back to their final stronghold, a massive underground complex that housed nearly 100,000 civilians. The Syndicate ground forces were preparing for a final assault that would break through the last defensive barriers. In the Syndicate flagship, Warlord Crix studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. The crystalline beings had put up more resistance than expected, but the outcome was inevitable. Soon he would have a new world to strip of resources and a new population to sell in the slave markets. His satisfaction was interrupted by an urgent report from his sensor operators. Warlord, we are detecting an approaching fleet. Unknown configuration, but they appear to be heading directly for us. Crix examined the sensor data with growing amusement. The approaching ships were tiny compared to his massive vessels. Their weapons appeared to be primitive kinetic systems rather than proper energy weapons. Who are they? Unknown, Warlord. But they are transmitting a message on standard emergency frequencies. Let me hear it. The human message crackled through the Syndicate's communication system. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. You are attacking innocent civilians under the protection of the Galactic Council. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Crix's laughter echoed through the bridge. Humans. The Deathworlders. I've heard stories about their backward little world. Destroy them quickly, then we can finish with the planet. But as he gave the order to attack, Crix felt a strange sensation, something he hadn't experienced in 30 years of conquest. For just a moment, he wondered if he might have made a mistake. The first human missile struck his flagship before his shields could adapt. Unlike the energy weapons he was used to, these primitive kinetic projectiles punched through his defenses like they were made of paper. Alarms began screaming throughout the Syndicate fleet as more human ships opened fire. Warlord Crick stared at his displays in shock. The small human vessels were moving in ways that should have been impossible, using tactics that made no sense. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose, and suddenly, for the first time in his long career of conquest, Crix began to understand what fear felt like. Deathworld's fury. The space around Proxima Centauri B erupted into violence as the human fleet engaged the Void Syndicate armada. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the EDF Defiance, watching the tactical display as her ships moved into attack formation. The enemy fleet was massive, their vessels dwarfing the human ships like whales surrounding minnows, but she had learned long ago that size wasn't everything in combat. All ships, execute Alpha pattern, she commanded. Remember, we are not here to win a fair fight. We are here to save those people. The human fleet scattered like a school of fish, each ship taking a different vector toward the enemy formation. This was not how space battles were supposed to be fought according to galactic military doctrine. Standard practice called for organized formations, careful positioning, and methodical exchanges of fire at maximum range. The humans ignored all of that. Captain Jennifer Walsh, commanding the destroyer EDF Vengeance, took her ship directly toward a Syndicate heavy cruiser 3 times her size. Her crew had trained for this kind of engagement in the asteroid fields around Jupiter, where a single mistake meant death and only the fastest ships survived. Range to target, she called out. 15,000 kilometers and closing, replied her tactical officer. Too far. Take us in closer. The Syndicate ship opened fire with its main energy cannons, beams of destructive force that could punch through a kilometer of solid rock. But the Vengeance was already moving, using a combination of thruster burns and gravitational slingshots around debris that would have been impossible for larger vessels. At 3,000 kilometers, Captain Walsh gave the order to fire. The Vengeance's kinetic cannons launched a barrage of tungsten projectiles at velocities that made them invisible to the naked eye. The Syndicate ship's shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid objects moving at significant fractions of light speed. The tungsten rounds tore through the alien vessel's hull like bullets through tissue paper. Atmosphere vented into space as the ship's superstructure buckled under the impact. The crew aboard the Syndicate vessel had never experienced anything like it. Their weapons couldn't lock onto the fast-moving human ship, and their defenses were useless against kinetic attacks. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human ships engaged the enemy using tactics that defied conventional military wisdom. They attacked from impossible angles, used debris as cover, and coordinated their movements with a precision that spoke of countless hours training in Earth's dangerous asteroid belts. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, piloting the light cruiser EDF Intrepid, found herself facing 3 Syndicate frigates simultaneously. Standard doctrine would have called for her to retreat and call for support. Instead, she accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. We're outnumbered 3-1, her executive officer pointed out nervously. Then it's a fair fight, Rodriguez replied with a grin that would have terrified most alien species. The Intrepid dove between the 3 enemy ships, using their own formation against them. The Syndicate vessels couldn't fire without risking hitting each other, while Rodriguez's gunners had clear shots at all 3 targets. Her ship's point defense systems, designed to intercept asteroid fragments in Earth's solar system, made short work of the enemy missiles, but the real shock came when the first human ship was damaged beyond repair. The destroyer EDF Courageous took multiple hits from a Syndicate battleship and began losing power. According to galactic military convention, the ship should have surrendered or retreated to avoid unnecessary casualties. Instead, Captain Robert Hayes ordered his crew to abandon ship, then programmed the vessel for a collision course with the enemy battleship. The Courageous struck the Syndicate vessel at full speed, the impact creating a fireball visible from the planet's surface. Both ships were destroyed, but the human crew had used their escape pods to reach safety. Warlord Crix watched the battle unfold from his flagship with growing horror. He had conquered 47 worlds and defeated the combined fleets of 3 different species, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans were fighting with a ferocity that defied understanding. They seemed to view the destruction of their own ships as acceptable losses if it meant damaging the enemy. How are they moving like that? He demanded of his tactical officers. Unknown, Warlord. Their ships appear to be designed for extreme maneuverability. They're using the debris field and gravitational anomalies as tactical advantages. What about their weapons? Our shields should stop kinetic projectiles. The projectiles are moving at velocities we've never encountered. They're using some kind of magnetic acceleration system to achieve near-light speeds. Crix studied the tactical display as another of his heavy cruisers exploded under human fire. The human ships were smaller, less heavily armed, and outnumbered. 5-1, but they were winning. It was impossible, but it was happening. The real battle, however, was taking place on the planet's surface. Captain Marcus Stone stood in the cramped confines of a drop pod, surrounded by 40 of his best Marines. The pod was one of 20 launching from the assault transport EDF Normandy, each carrying a full platoon of troops. Unlike the careful, methodical deployments favored by most galactic militaries, the humans were conducting a combat drop directly into the middle of the enemy-held territory. 2 minutes to impact, announced the pilot over the intercom. It's going to be a rough ride. That was an understatement. The drop pods were essentially armored coffins shot from orbit at tremendous speed. They relied on heat shields, parachutes, and retro-rockets to slow their descent, but the margin for error was tiny. Most alien species considered combat drops too dangerous to attempt. Humans had been perfecting the technique for decades. Sergeant Maria Santos checked her rifle one last time as the pod shook violently during atmospheric entry. She was a veteran of 3 colonial wars and had made over 50 combat drops, but she never got used to the sensation of falling toward an enemy-held planet at terminal velocity. "Listen up," Captain Stone announced over the squad comm system. "Intelligence says the Syndicate forces are concentrated around the colony's main entrances. We are going to punch through their lines, reach the civilians, and hold our position until the fleet can clear the orbital defenses." The pods hit the ground with impacts that would have killed most alien life forms. Human Marines, trained on a world where survival meant adapting to extreme conditions, simply unlocked their harnesses and prepared for combat. Santos was the first out of her pod, her rifle already scanning for targets. The landscape around the colony was a hellscape of craters and burning ruins. Syndicate forces had been bombarding the area for days, turning the once beautiful Etherean city into a wasteland, but the Marines adapted quickly. They had trained for urban combat in the ruins of old Detroit and the bombed-out cities of the colonial wars. Rubble and smoke were just another environment to master. The first Syndicate patrol they encountered was completely unprepared for human tactics. The reptilian soldiers were tall and strong, wearing environmental suits that made them look like walking tanks. Their energy weapons could cut through steel, and their armor could withstand most small arms fire, but they had never faced an enemy that actually wanted to get closer to them. Corporal Mike Chen, Santos's point man, spotted the patrol first. 6 Syndicate soldiers moving through the ruins in a standard sweep formation. According to galactic military doctrine, he should have called for support and engaged at maximum range. Instead, he signaled for the squad to flank them. The human Marines moved through the rubble like ghosts, using cover and concealment techniques perfected in Earth's urban combat zones. They got within 50 meters of the enemy patrol before opening fire, and by then it was too late for the Syndicate forces to respond effectively. Human weapons were designed differently from their galactic counterparts. Instead of energy beams, they fired solid projectiles at high velocity. The rounds punched through Syndicate armor with devastating effect, and the rapid rate of fire overwhelmed the aliens' ability to return accurate shots, but the real shock came when the Marines closed for hand-to-hand combat. Private Tommy Rodriguez tackled a Syndicate soldier twice his size, his combat knife finding the weak points in the alien's environmental suit. The reptilian warrior panicked. He had never fought an enemy that seemed to thrive on close quarters violence. Within minutes, the entire patrol was down. The surviving Syndicate soldiers radioed back to their command post with reports that defied belief. "These humans fight like demons," one of them gasped into his communicator. "They don't fear death. They actually seem to enjoy combat." The report reached Warlord Crix just as his flagship shuddered under another barrage of human kinetic rounds. He was fighting a two-front war against an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous the closer they got, but the real test came when Captain Stone's Marines reached the colony's underground shelters. The blast doors were sealed, and Syndicate forces had planted charges to collapse the tunnels if they couldn't capture the civilians alive. Stone studied the defensive positions through his scope. The enemy had established overlapping fields of fire and positioned their heavy weapons to cover all approaches. It was a textbook defensive setup that should have been impossible to break without massive casualties. Sergeant Santos, what do you think? Asterisk. Santos examined the terrain, noting the placement of enemy positions and the layout of the underground complex. It's going to be ugly, Captain. They've got us in a crossfire zone with no cover. Ideas? Well, sir, we could try the Martian Gambit. Stone smiled grimly. The Martian Gambit was a desperate tactic they had used during the colonial wars when human forces had been trapped in similar circumstances. It involved using underground tunnels to bypass enemy defenses, but it required someone to go in alone and clear the way. I'll take point, Stone said. With respect, sir, this is a job for someone smaller and faster. Santos was right. The maintenance tunnels leading to the colony's underground levels were narrow and filled with debris. It would take someone with extensive experience in confined spaces to navigate them successfully. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been coordinating the rescue efforts from orbit, provided crucial intelligence. The tunnels connect to the colony's atmospheric processing system. If you can reach the main environmental controls, you can flood the syndicate positions with inert gas. Will that work? Stone asked. The syndicate forces are wearing sealed environmental suits, but they are designed for protection against vacuum, not chemical warfare. If we can force them to use their emergency air supplies, we can limit their operating time. It was a desperate plan, but it was the best option they had. Santos volunteered for the tunnel mission, taking only a sidearm and basic equipment to minimize her profile. The journey through the maintenance tunnels was a nightmare of crawling through debris-filled passages in complete darkness. Santos had to rely on her training and instincts to navigate the maze of pipes and conduits. Several times she had to clear blockages by hand, knowing that any noise might alert the enemy to her presence. After 2 hours of crawling through the mechanical guts of the colony, she finally reached the environmental control center. The systems were designed for Etherian operators, but human engineers had learned to adapt alien technology during their brief membership in the galactic community. Santos activated the emergency atmospheric system, flooding the syndicate positions with a mixture of nitrogen and carbon dioxide. The effect was immediate. The enemy soldiers began falling back as their suit alarms warned of contaminated air. That was the signal for the main assault. Captain Stone led his Marines in a frontal attack while the enemy was distracted by the atmospheric emergency. The human forces moved with the precision of a military machine, each squad coordinating their movements to maximum effect. The syndicate defense collapsed within minutes. The reptilian soldiers, already disoriented by the atmospheric attack, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to thrive in chaotic conditions. The humans moved through the smoke and confusion like they were born to it, their weapons and tactics perfectly adapted for close-quarters combat. But the real moment came when the Marines finally broke through to the civilian shelters. The blast. Doors opened to reveal hundreds of Etherian families, men, women, and children who had been trapped underground for days, not knowing if they would ever see sunlight again. The sight of human soldiers, their faces grim with determination but their eyes kind, brought tears to many of the refugees. These strange beings from the dangerous world called Earth had traveled across the galaxy to save people they had never met. Private Jessica Kim, a Marine from New Angeles, knelt beside a group of young Etherians who were too frightened to move. She removed her helmet, revealing a face that was both tough and gentle. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice translator converting her words into the musical tones of the Etherian language. "We are here to help. You're safe now." Above the planet, the space battle had reached its climax. Admiral Chen's fleet had managed to destroy or disable over half of the syndicate vessels, but the remaining enemy ships were regrouping for a final assault. Warlord Crix, his flagship damaged but still functional, made a decision that would have been unthinkable just hours before. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. "Human Admiral," his voice crackled through the static, "I propose a ceasefire. Your forces have fought impressively. Perhaps we can reach an agreement." Chen's response was immediate and uncompromising. "The only agreement I'm interested in is your complete withdrawal from this system. Leave now, and you can keep what's left of your fleet." Stay, and we'll finish what you started. Crix found himself in an impossible position. His forces still outnumbered the humans, but the battle had shown him that numbers meant nothing against enemies who fought with such intensity. The humans had destroyed his best ships and his most experienced crews. They had rescued the civilians. He had planned to capture and turned his ground assault into a rout. For the first time in 30 years of conquest, Warlord Crix chose to retreat. The remaining Syndicate vessels began withdrawing from the system, their crews demoralized and their leader's reputation shattered. They had faced the legendary Deathworlders of Earth and learned why the galaxy both feared and respected the humans. As the enemy fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had saved the colony, defeated a superior force, and proven that humanity deserved its place in the galactic community. On the planet's surface, Captain Stone's Marines were coordinating the evacuation of civilians to safety. The rescued Etherians looked at their human saviors with a mixture of gratitude and awe. These beings from the dangerous world had risked everything to protect people they had never met. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring the aftermath from the medical ship EDF Mercy, reflected on what they had accomplished. The human fleet had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, not through superior technology or numbers, but through determination, courage, and an unwillingness to abandon those in need. The news of the victory spread throughout the galaxy. Within hours, the species that had refused to help the Etherian colony watched in amazement as reports came in of the human fleet's impossible victory. The Deathworlders had faced the legendary Void Syndicate and won. But perhaps the most important moment came 3 days later, when the rescued Etherian civilians were being transferred to safe worlds. An elderly Etherian named Veltar approached Admiral Chen as she toured the refugee ships. "Admiral," he said, his crystalline form glowing with gratitude, "why did your people come? You did not know us. We had nothing to offer you in return." Chen considered the question carefully. "Because you asked for help," she said finally. "And humans don't abandon people who need our help." The old Etherian's form brightened further. "Then perhaps there is hope for this galaxy after all." As the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, they left behind more than just a rescued colony. They had shown the galaxy that there were still those willing to stand up to bullies, to fight for the innocent, and to risk everything for people they had never met. The Deathworlders had answered the call for help with fire and fury. And the galaxy would never be the same.